Good afternoon. I'm Molly Young from the Miami University Alumni Association. As part of the Alumni Association's webinar series, today we present Generative AI, a career catalyst. Joining us for today's conversation is Dr. Russ Hamer, Associate Director of Emerging Technology Programs here at Miami. Welcome to you, Russ. Thank you for being here to help us sharpen some skills. Just a reminder to our live viewers, you can submit questions during the webinar by clicking the Ask a Question button under your video. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Russ to get us started. Welcome again. Thank you.
Thanks a bunch. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here, chat with y'all about generative AI and ways to think about it and use it that will benefit your career. So a little bit of background on myself. I'm not coming to you from a technical background. I don't code, I don't program. So if anyone out there is thinking that like, oh, you need to be a programmer, I need to know how to code, you don't. My degree was in philosophy before I started moving into tech spaces. So I very much come from a humanities background and think about generative AI as a tool that we can use in a variety of ways. So it's an area I've done research in. It's an area I've published in, but it's not something that I can't code. I can code as well as your second grader can code. And that's about it. So when we think about generative AI, a quick little sort of brief examination of what it is. So first of all, when we think about generative AI, before we get into it, this is something that we should consider as a significant technology. Every tech giant in the world is betting on this being the next big thing. And many are thinking that it's going to be as transformative as the internet. It's going to have a sizable impact. And the impact is one that it's sometimes referred to as what's called a landmark technology, which is to say that it impacts everyone in ways that you don't expect because it hits everyone at once, just like the internet did. So when the internet comes out, people aren't thinking, oh, this is relevant to my job, but it turns out it's relevant to everyone's jobs everywhere. So that's the sort of scope that we're thinking in. When a lot of people think of generative AI, they think of something just like ChatGPT, and that's fine because that's for a lot of people the way that they've engaged with generative AI. But it's a lot more than that. Generative AI can produce really any sort of output that we ask of it. Some it can just produce better than others. So currently, models can produce text, music, images. Sora, which was released recently, can produce video and pretty good video. And these things are improving quickly. So if we look at Sora, the recent video model that came out, about a year ago, some very early video models came out, and they were terrible. The videos they produced were nightmares. Faces melting. It was awful. And a year later, they can produce great videos of a camera flying through the streets, and it's like, oh yeah, that's great. So there's a very significant pace at which these models are advancing. And the models are just trained on massive amounts of data. Broadly, what happens is the models don't know anything. They just guess. They predict what the next thing should be. So for text models, they're guessing the next word. They say, okay, here's the 10,000 words that have come before this. What's the most probable next word? And when you give them, massive amounts of data, when you give them every book that's ever been written and all the data on the internet, they get really good at guessing the next word. Similar with images. Images are guessing pixel by pixel. So they say like, okay, if this pixel's red, what color should the pixel right next to it be? Slightly, a lighter shade of red. Okay, what about the pixel next to it? An even lighter shade. And they go pixel by pixel to generate what an image should look like. And those are similarly trained on publicly available data. Every image on the internet, I shouldn't say every, most images on the internet have some sort of text associated with them, a description that says, this is a picture of a red flower. And so then the model gets enough pictures of red flowers to know when someone says, paint me a picture of a red flower, that red, it's going to start with a red pixel here, and then it's going to guess, okay, this many pixels, and it just slowly guesses pixel by pixel. So it does this with all of these different processes. Some are more complex than other. Music and video, it's taken us a while to figure out how to really do those well. But now there's current models that are pretty good. Sora is really impressive with video. There's a recent model that came out recently, I forget what it's called, that can make full songs. It'll generate lyrics. It'll voice the lyrics. You tell it, I want, a country music song about Luke Skywalker, and boom, country song about Luke Skywalker. I mean, whatever you're asking for, it can generate it. And they're pretty good. But it's important to remember that they don't know anything. Generative AI doesn't make decisions based on what's true. It makes decisions based on predictably what should come next. And that's a bit of an oversimplification. There are some complex models that do different various checks to check for things like factual information, but broadly speaking, that's how generative AI works. It's just trying to predict what's next. So some general things to consider when we think about generative AI and the workforce and jobs and careers. Generative AI will replace some jobs, but it won't replace most. So the jobs that are most likely to get replaced first are things like people who work at call centers. If you work at a call center and you answer questions that are sort of customer service questions where, most of your answers are just you and I mean, I've worked in a call center when I was in college, and when you work in a call center, they give you a little binder with like, here's all the answers to every question. So there's basically just a bunch of data, and you're functioning as an intermediary between someone's question and the data that they need. Well, generative AI can do that. Generative AI can understand what the question is, find the right data, generate a human voice, and respond and answer questions and go back and forth. So those are the sorts of jobs that are likely to be replaced. But most jobs require human judgment. They require us to make decisions about what's most important. And those jobs are not likely to be replaced by generative AI. Instead, what we're going to see is that humans who use generative AI are most likely to replace humans who don't, because generative AI just makes you a more efficient worker. So when you're able to use these tools effectively, you're able to get so much more done than someone who doesn't. So we're not going to see computers taking over jobs. We're going to see people who use computers taking over jobs. And we see that historically. Like that's sort of what happened when the internet came out, and what happened when computers came out. There was people who knew how to use those things efficiently that replaced the people who refused to learn. And all of you are here, so you're interested in learning. There have been some studies that have looked at generative AI and sort of efficiency impact, and they've shown that generative AI tends to have the largest impact on the least skilled employees. So those who are struggling the most see the biggest gains. Those who are already very good at their jobs, who regularly receive top evaluations from their direct superiors, see a slight increase. They're certainly more efficient, but not nearly the increase that you see with the lower skilled employees. And part of this is because if you're already very good at your job, there aren't a lot of things that generative AI can really help you with. You know how to do everything very effectively. But if you're struggling, if you're new, if there's still a bunch of processes you're learning, generative AI is wildly effective in helping you improve in those things. Another thing to think about is that the generative AI that you use today is basically the worst generative AI you'll ever use. Like I mentioned, these things are just getting better. And so if you run into a situation where you think, I need to do XYZ at my work, and generative AI can't do XYZ very well, I don't need to pay attention to this. You don't need to pay attention to this for 6 months, maybe. But like I said, a year ago, the videos that generative AI made were nightmare fuel, and now they're excellent. So Things that generative AI couldn't do in the past aren't really indicative of what generative AI will be able to do in the future. So current capabilities shouldn't be a judge of future capabilities. Also, you don't need fancy training. You need experience. Spend the general sort of rule of thumb that a lot of people use in the space is spend 10 hours with a specific model, not with generative AI in general. So 10 hours with text generation, 10 hours with image generation, 10 hours with video, etc. If you spend 10 hours using that tool, you won't be an expert, but you'll be good enough. You don't need special training. They're very easy to use. They're designed based on human language. They're entirely designed around the way that we talk. So certainly there's some tips and tricks, and I'll get into some of those things later on. But broadly, just use it. Just try it out. Ask it questions. Do some things that you're trying to do. See what tasks it can succeed at. And when it fails, don't think, oh, this tool doesn't work. Think of, okay, I didn't get it to do the thing I wanted it to do. How can I change what I'm doing to get it to do the thing that I want it to do? Because it doesn't know anything. It doesn't know what you want. And the piece of advice that I have there is talk to models like they're people, but remember that they're not people. Since these are trained on human language, the easiest way to engage with them is to treat them like it's a person that you're talking to. I, for instance, just because it helps me remember to treat it like to talk like a person, I almost always start all my requests with like, "Will you please?" Like ChatGPT, "Will you please?" X, Y, blah blah blah. Just because it helps me remember, like, just talk in a sort of normal conversational tone. There are, a couple of little things you can do. It's useful, for instance, to tell the model what role it's playing. So you're an expert lawyer. Give me advice on XYZ. So giving it a sort of like, this is the thing I want you to do, the role I want you to play. That's usually a helpful way to start. But broadly, you don't need any sort of special tips. If you're not sure how to get a good result out of generative AI, ask generative AI to write a prompt for you. It is wildly effective. So you can say, dear ChatGPT, I really need help doing XYZ. I have goals ABC. Can you please write a prompt for yourself that will provide, D output? I need this as a graph, whatever. And it'll say, great, here's a prompt. And then you just copy that, paste it, and do the prompt. Finally, you should always know your organization's stance on generative AI. Everyone has different stances. Some businesses are fine with you using it in the workplace. Some are not. There are data privacy concerns. Do not send proprietary data to ChatGPT, because any data you send to ChatGPT without your business having a business.
You went away.
Off because it didn't hear anything and it thought, no reason to be on.
You're good. Thanks, Russ.
So know your organization stance. If your organization doesn't have a business agreement with any specific AI provider, then if you send them proprietary data, you've done a bad thing. Don't do that. So just know that stance. So thinking about careers specifically, I sort of outline here 3 different approaches to how you should think about generative AI. So the first is to think of it as an upskilling agent. Use generative AI to learn the things that you're struggling with. At our work, there's always different things that we're supposed to do that we don't know how to do as well as someone else. I imagine for all of you, there is some task that every time it comes up, you think, maybe I can get John to do this for me, or, whatever. Use generative AI to become good at that task. It's very good at giving you a step-by-step process on how to learn something. I need to learn how to make a pivot table in Excel, as an example of a thing that I personally have no idea how to do. If I ask ChatGPT how to make me a pivot table, it'll do a great, or how to teach me, or how I should learn how to make a pivot table. It'll do a great job. It'll give me step-by-step process. Here's how I should go about learning this. Here's some resources I should look up. I can ask, like, can you give me some sample ones that are easy to try with, and it'll generate all those things for me. So ask it how you should learn. Ask it to teach you. It's very good at that. With some models, so if you use paid GPT, if you use Bing through the browser, through the Bing browser, which accesses paid GPT, or if you use paid Gemini, you can screenshot problems and circle the part you don't understand, upload the image, and ask it to explain the thing that's circled. You get some giant diagram, you get some graph, you get some piece of data, whatever it happens to be that you don't understand, circle it, upload the image, and say, please explain this. It's very good at doing that. And broadly, what's required of you here is to sort of metacognate about the things that you know and don't know and what you need to learn. You need to think about what skills you lack that would make you better at your job, what skills you lack that would advance your career, what skills you lack that would help you make that career pivot that you're interested in making. And you can ask those questions to generative models, but those are the sorts of things that they're going to struggle with because they don't know you and what you're good at. So you could say, what skills does a good graphic designer need? And great, you'll get a good list. And you can use that to then sort of figure out, okay, I can do this and this, but not that. Okay, how do I learn number 3 here? And then, take that route. But you also just sort of have to observe your surroundings and figure out what are you good at? What skills do you possess? And figure out how you can use generative AI to fill in those gaps that you're wanting to fill in. And the skills can be quite broad. We're not just talking about very specific hard skills, so to speak. It's not just how to make pivot tables. Maybe you're bad at networking. Have a fake conversation. Tell GPT, hey, I want you to role play as an executive and act like we're meeting at a bar and I'm trying to network with you. And what I want you to do is role play as the executive. Don't act too interested in me. And then after the conversation is over, I want you to analyze the conversation that we just had and tell me how to improve. Easy. GPT can do that, no problem. So it's even some of those soft skills, things that you want to improve on that you think will advance your career, like networking. I say this because I hate networking and I'm terrible at it. Anytime someone invites me to a networking event, I'm just like hard pass, which is how I ended up in academia. So upskilling, very good at that. Another thing is to think of GPT as a thought assistant. Humans are often able to think best when we can bounce ideas around. There's a reason that we have group meetings where anytime, there's some new challenge, let's get a couple people together, hop into, a corner office and just start tossing things at each other. Use generative AI to do that. It'll make you appear, and I mean, not just appear, like you will be so much further along in the process when you initially pose something to your group, your team, your boss, whatever it happens to be, when you're able to have already been bouncing ideas around for the past 30 minutes. You've been working on this problem for a while, not by yourself. You come up with an idea, or there's a problem that you're facing. You outline the problem, you propose some solutions, you have generative AI criticize those solutions, you respond to the criticisms, you go back and forth, you pick out the good ideas, etc. And then the first conversation that you have with your boss is, hey, there's X problem, and I think Y solution is a good one, but happy to bounce this around some. If you've done that bouncing around, then your boss is just going to be like, that's a great solution. Awesome. Love it. Check with these other people, but sounds good, So you can sort of bypass oftentimes that initial process where everyone is just offering up random ideas, which is sometimes a painful process in a group because some of the ideas are terrible. And you waste a bunch of time trying to convince other people that their ideas are bad. do it solo. Do it solo with generative AI. It's not going to waste any time. It's going to tell you all of your bad ideas. It's going to categorize them. And you can also, as I note here, use specific frameworks if you'd like. You can use, say, look, give me a SWOT analysis of these ideas. Do use case modeling on these 3 possible solutions to this problem. You can do those sorts of things. If you pick a specific framework, especially if it's a known framework, if it's been published about, then GPT has it in its data bank. And so when you say, do a SWOT analysis, well, GPT has read hundreds of textbooks on what a SWOT analysis looks like. It can produce a really good SWOT analysis. So it can provide specific framework, sort of criticisms of your ideas, or benefits. Here's this idea that I have. Give me a SWOT analysis. Show me all those strengths. Like, it might be great. You can also, have it criticize reports, plans, documents, anything that you've generated. You can toss it up and say, what are the 3 primary weaknesses to this approach? Or how could I improve this document? Or how could I make my report more persuasive? Or whatever it happens to be. And it can sort of give you those suggestions. You can also just have it come up with multiple variations. Maybe you have a good idea, but you're not exactly sure on how to execute on that idea. Ask it to generate, hey, what are 5 different ways that I could execute on this? And then you find one that you really like and say, hey, provide another 5 variations on that execution. And just keep fine tuning down till you have a really good plan on the way to execute a specific plan, on the way to get something done. And you can then say, okay, what about this execution in a different context? I mean, it can go forever. So you can keep sort of doing that. And the best way to approach the sort of thought assistant side of generative AI is to think about it in that way. This isn't something where you ask it one question. This is something that you engage with over and over, and slowly sharpen your ideas. And so if you think of it just as in the way that we use the internet oftentimes, when we're trying to Google something, there's a direct answer that we're searching for. I want to find the answer to the question I'm asking. That is not the way to use generative AI. Generative AI isn't a question answer sort of tool. And so if you approach it that way, you won't get the most out of it. Instead, you should think about it as a conversation. You should be going back and forth consistently with the generative AI tool that you're using in order to produce the best result. So you want to make sure that it's not just, and I mean, if you have a simple question you're trying to get answered, that's fine. Ask a question, no problem. But broadly, you want to, when you're thinking of it as a thought assistant, you really want to embrace the conversation. Think of this as a colleague which, I have a few of those. I imagine most of us do that when I've got a decent idea, but I just really need help, like really thinking it through. I've got a couple of colleagues that I call up and we sort of shoot it around. Think of generative AI as helping you do that. So it's iterative, it's regular. The last thing, last sort of core thing for generative AI is to think about it as a productivity multiplier. Generative AI can generate all of these things unendingly. There's no end to what it can generate. So embrace the fact that this is an unlimited helper. There might be some limits depending on which models you're using, and if you're using the paid version versus a lot of the free versions will say, you get 50 exchanges a day. Sorry about that. Once we get to Q&A and Molly pops in, the headset will hear just the tiniest bit and it won't auto turn itself off. But the generation is unlimited. And so when you're trying to fine tune an idea, when you're trying to generate a report, when you're trying to analyze some document, whatever it happens to be, generative AI can do it over and over and over and over and over again. When you're trying to learn, anytime I'm trying to learn something new, especially if it's a task that is a little physical in nature, every time I have to fix something at my house, it's like pull up a YouTube video of someone telling me how to fix this thing. And that's super helpful. Um, but oftentimes when I do that, I'll watch a video and be like, oh, okay, I didn't really get it. I need to find another one. And I just have to keep looking until I find the right video that explains it in a way that I understand. Generative AI can just keep generating. I wouldn't suggest it to generate videos on how to fix your dishwasher because it doesn't know how to fix your dishwasher because it doesn't know anything. But when you are, I say that as someone who recently watched a video on how to fix his dishwasher. When you are trying to generate something, if you're trying to learn something, whatever it happens to be, if you say, hey, explain it this way, and you don't get it, explain it another way, explain it a third way, explain it using only football examples, explain how to make a pivot table as if I've never used a computer, or whatever. I mean, you can do this an unlimited amount of times. And you have to sort of embrace that unlimitedness. And that's why I said you shouldn't think about this as a question answer sort of thing, the way we treat like Google and search right now. Instead, you should think of this as a regular process. And so that's why I say here in the second point, troubleshoot every problem with generative AI at your side. Anytime you run into an issue at work or, fixing a dishwasher, go at that problem with, whatever model you use. I use OpenAI's models the most, so I just say GPT. But go at that problem with GPT at your side so that you're able to, okay, I tried X and Y happened, which isn't what I expected. Enter, and it'll say like, oh, if Y happened, then it's probably not, A problem, it's probably B problem. If it's B problem, try this as a solution. And you go like, okay, and you try that solution and you say, well, now it's generating this other error message. Oh, and so like just constantly go at it where you're explaining what you're trying and the system is responding to that attempt and trying to provide new solutions. So anytime you're troubleshooting problems, have it at your side. It's wildly helpful. You can also use generative AI to generate things that don't need your specific voice or expertise, like letters of recommendation. Recommendation letters all say the same thing. Russ is a great employee. He's always someone that is a leader in the office, whatever. They're all super generic, or at least 90% of the content in them is super generic. And you can hop into ChatGPT and say, write a letter of recommendation for Susie Q. Her strengths are XYZ. Boop. There, you just saved 30 minutes of time. Emails. Some emails are so basic. Thanks, I'll update you as I learn more, sort of stuff. Progress reports. If you have all the data and all you're having to do is write a report summarizing that data, that doesn't need your expertise. Let GPT do that. An important note is to always double check the outputs. GPTs make mistakes. Generative AIs make mistakes. So double check the outputs. Don't just submit something once it's finished. Reread it. It's one of the challenges with generative AI is that it's easy for us to be lazy and to go into autopilot. And it is a real challenge. And everyone's different. You have to build your own way to avoid that, whether it's you have a habit of always checking or you leave a little sticky note to check or whatever. Always check the outputs. Also, asking generative AI questions instead of asking coworkers questions just improves your organizational efficiency. If there's a problem that you're having, instead of wasting your coworkers' time, and I don't mean wasting because, we're social creatures who like to engage with each other. That's good. We should always be social creatures. We should engage with each other. But if there's a problem that you can solve and you have to ask your coworker to help you solve it, overall, as an organization, your efficiency has gone down. So using generative AI instead of using human capital just improves your organizational efficiency. And the last thing I want to leave you with is two sort of metaphors for how you can use generative AI, cyborgs versus centaurs. So a centaur is a half human, half horse. A cyborg is a human who has had some of their human parts replaced with machine parts. So when we think about generative AI, a centaur is someone who has a very clear line of what they do themselves versus what they push off onto generative AI. So you have, XYZ tasks that I will complete all by myself. And I also have ABC tasks that I will only allow, or that I'll use generative AI to assist me with. So the Centaur approach broadly works when you have problems or when you work in a domain wherein your expertise and your knowledge is critically important to accomplishing some of your goals. Only you know how this thing works. Then a Centaur approach probably makes the most sense. There are some tasks that generative AI shouldn't have a part in, and other tasks that it doesn't need your expertise. You don't need to write that report, but you're the only one who knew which data was the important piece of data. So you show the data, like you figure out the data, and then whatever. The cyborg approach is that everything is both. That you have generative AI at your sides at all times, that you're regularly using it with every bit of work you're doing, every process you're engaging with has generative AI as a part of it. It's not as if one of these is better than the other. But I think it's useful to keep in mind when you're thinking about how would I incorporate this into my job or into my life. Broadly speaking, it'll be most efficient for most people to be cyborgs. Centaurs, like if you're a nuclear engineer, you should be a centaur. There are things that you should not trust to generative AI. So thinking about myself, for instance, courses I teach and whatnot, I take a centaur approach partially because I think engaging with students is critically important for me. I don't want them to engage with an AI. I want them to engage with me. That's my job. It's my job to instruct them. So I view a lot of that direct engagement as like that's a me job. Grading, I wouldn't put grading off to an AI. But when it comes to a lot of the administrative tasks that I do, sure, AI can be a part of all of those, no problem. So it just depends on you and your role and your business and your job and your career and all those sorts of things as to what makes the most sense, whether you should be a cyborg or you should be a centaur. I think that's my last slide. Yes, questions. So we have a handful of questions that were sent in beforehand. I'm going to start with some of those, and then I imagine Molly has been following the chat. She can hop in and ask some of the ones that y'all have submitted while we've been speaking. So I don't know, Molly, have there been a lot of questions?
Not a lot, but we do have a couple.
Okay,
If you
cool.
want to start with the ones that you have, and then assuming these are different, then I'll chime in with the new ones.
Sounds good. Cool. I didn't know if I
Awesome.
needed to like speed run these or whatnot. Okay, so yeah.
Oh,
One of the questions sent ahead of time was asking, what are the best resources to learn and stay current with generative AI? The hard answer is that there aren't any great resources. The space has been moving, the generative AI space is only 2 years old in a strong sense, in a public sense. The research sense, it's maybe 5 years old. But in a public sense, it's only 2 years old. So it's rapidly changing. Staying up to date is really sort of domain specific. So staying up to date in terms of generative AI in education looks very different from staying up to date in generative AI in healthcare. Wildly different things are going on in those spaces. I will say that I think there's two people that I think are worth sort of paying attention to. One is professor at NYU, Connor Grennan. He used to be the dean of their business school, and now he's running up. They changed his job, and now he's running up their AI approach. The other is a researcher at University of Pennsylvania, Ethan Mollick. And so I point out two academics. But these are both people who work in business schools and who think about how, like, their job is to think about how tech impacts economies, people, businesses. They regularly um, uh, do consulting work for Fortune 500 companies and tell them about how to use these technologies, things like that. So they do some research stuff, but they're very public facing. They're very accessible. I think those are two great people to sort of pay attention to. There's a question asking, how do we know when AI is being used to misrepresent facts? It's a great question, and it's a tricky one. So like I mentioned earlier, AI doesn't know anything. And there are a handful of different models out there, and every model is trained a little bit differently and is given different sort of guardrails that tell it how to act, what to respond to, things like that. So broadly, what AI is doing, like I mentioned, is it's just trying to predict the next word. So with facts that are very well established, it's going to get those right because it's been written about 1,000 times. Who won the Battle of Gettysburg? No AI is going to get that one wrong because there's millions of books on it. It's got massive amounts of data showcasing, like, okay, it's going to be the Union. But with more niche questions or questions that are about things that happened yesterday, there's not as much data to work on, and sometimes generative AI will make mistakes in trying to, answer those questions. So the real answer is that there's no way to know when generative AI is misrepresenting the truth. The best thing you can do is double check. Question here. I've mostly shied away from using any form of AI because I fear I'll become over-reliant and not able to carry out tasks or generate ideas on my own. What would you say to creators who are hesitant to use AI for that reason? It's a great question. So, like I mentioned, over-reliance is a concern. It's easy to go into autopilot and, hey, write these letters of recommendation, and you submit them, and then later you realize, like, oh, this was terrible. Like, I don't want my name to have been on this piece of paper, but now it is. So it's easy to become over-reliant, and it's a challenge to keep yourself away from that. And I think the best way to do that is, I guess there's a couple ways. One, you can always take the Centaur approach, where you can clearly delineate which tasks will I use generative AI for, versus which tasks will I not. The other, if you want to take a cyborg approach, is to make sure that you're using generative AI as a part of the process and not as the whole process. So like I said, where we treat internet search as here's a question, I'm hoping that the first link is the answer. And there's really good data that Google has, for instance, that no one clicks beyond page 1 because we just want the immediate answer. If we treat generative AI as part of that process, I'm thinking of doing this. What are your thoughts? Okay, that's an interesting, but what about these challenges? Okay, but I wanted it to serve this purpose, and here's how I want it to work. When you're having this constant back and forth, it's harder to become over-reliant on the thing, because if you're not supplying that back and forth with quality, you're not going to get quality in response. So if you're not sort of engaging in a useful back and forth manner, ChatGPT doesn't know how to give you good responses because it doesn't know what you're looking for. So the easiest
Such
way.
a good point, Russ, to supply it with quality to get quality. It's like a lot of other relationships, I think, you sort of get what you give. So that's, I think, important to point out.
No, exactly. That it's a situation where if what you're putting in, draw me a picture of a unicorn. All right, it'll draw a picture of a unicorn and it'll be a good picture. Is it the picture you wanted? That's a separate question. So you need to sort of go into the process with an idea of what should come out of it so that you're not just satisfied with, like, oh, that's good enough, because thinking this is good enough, that's the way to just over rely on it. You're going to end up having no creative juice. You're going to end up being just someone who asks questions to generative AI and isn't able to do anything other than ask the basic question. And that's not good. So we have a question about AI in medicine. So right now, generative AI is doing a lot of really interesting things in medicine. I say this as not legal or medical advice, that I'm going to start by saying that. But I use ChatGPT as my initial doctor's visit every time. Does something in my body feel weird? Let's ask ChatGPT about it because it's been right every single time. I recently moved and I was having some weird numbness in my right arm, and I was like, okay, right arm, not a heart attack, but what's going on? And I described all the symptoms to ChatGPT as explicitly as possible. When I poke here, it doesn't hurt. When I poke here, it hurts. The numbness is felt here, but only when I raise my arm a certain amount. And I don't remember the name of the syndrome, is like thoracic outlet syndrome or something like that. It was basically when I moved, I had overexerted myself carrying boxes, and there's a blood vessel that runs right underneath your collarbone. And my collarbone was pinching that blood vessel, and it was causing a little bit like it decreased blood flow to my right arm, which it could still use it, but in certain situations, it would, it'd get a little numb. I'd have the sort of needles feeling. And then it was like, and here's a couple of stretches to fix that. Did the stretches? Fixed. Glorious. So especially with not emergency things, and again, don't like I have a pint of blood going out of my leg every hour. That is not a time to talk to ChatGPT. But with very not emergency things, ChatGPT is a great first resource.
Like an initial consult, sort of.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Because when your initial consult with your doctor is you describing symptoms and your doctor thinking, okay, based on all of those symptoms, it's probably this. And there have been studies that have been done on GPTs, on generative AI broadly. I'm not trying to advertise ChatGPT versus other models. On generative AI's effectiveness. And basically, generative AI is just as effective as a doctor on doing that initial consult. Once you get beyond that, then it oftentimes becomes the doctor like, okay, let me feel this tendon, and okay, like then it becomes something that generative AI can't really assist with. The other medical use that generative AI is being used a lot in is in imaging. So in analyzing MRIs and analyzing CAT scans, in analyzing X-rays to determine, because that's just an image, and an image can be fed into a giant database that says, hey, here's what a brain tumor looks like. Here's 10 million pictures of a brain tumor. Based on all of those pictures, is this picture a brain tumor? Generative AI is pretty good at figuring that out. Because again, it's just going pixel by pixel. It's just saying, well, if this pixel is here, here's the color that the next pixel should be. But wait, it's not that color. Problem, and some studies have shown that generative AI is also better at recognizing generative AI models that have been trained specifically for like medical imaging processes are better at recognizing, those sorts of problems. I don't know. In medical images than humans are. Other questions. Are there tips or tricks for making daily tasks easier and quicker with AI? So I'd mentioned a couple in the chat, but broadly, yeah, it's trying to work it into your daily tasks. Every time you're doing something and you think this is going to take me 20 minutes, just pause. Like, does it need to? Let me ask ChatGPT something really quick. Or anytime you have work that's sort of mundane, that it's an important thing. You have to answer those emails. You have to do whatever. But like, how could this be improved, or something you have to learn? And one of the things you could do is you can ask generative AI, hey, how could generative AI assist me in solving X, Y, Z? And it won't always be right, but it'll sort of give you a like, oh, I hadn't thought about using it in those ways. Interesting, neat. I'll try that next time.
We actually have someone over here in University Advancement who has honed all of her AIs, or Chat GPT skills, and she's really revolutionized the way we do. She does many things, including like sending calendar invites to a big swath of us in UA. So it's really, I think, helped her trim some time on the back end just by sort of honing her skills. And, like you said, like spend 10 hours. I would imagine she has spent 10 hours because she's that good.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all it takes is that time.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a question about career paths for AI, especially from people who already have established careers. So if you want to get into AI, there's sort of two things to do. One, it's to learn machine learning. That's a toughie. If you want to really become a machine learning expert, you are welcome to, and it's going to be a lot of data analysis and data science. And if that's adjacent to your field, great. The other thing to do is just to use it a lot. If you want to become, sort of as Molly just mentioned, if you want to become the AI person in your office, you don't need special training. You need a lot of time. Just use it constantly. And as you use it, you'll start to see, oh, this could work here. Oh, this could work there. It doesn't help us with this problem, but it does help us with this one. And then you become the go-to person. And it's just because you've put the time in. It's such a new thing that you don't need formal education, again, unless you want to build a model, unless you want to go into machine learning and actually be the person that makes AI. You just need a ton of experience, and you can do that right now.
No, essentially, we're all sort of like starting at the same spot. We're all on the same learning curve at this point because it's so new. And, it's just a matter of dipping a toe in and then, yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
basically, I was on an AI research team a couple years ago before ChatGPT came out, and we were doing generative AI language sort of stuff. And ChatGPT came out, and everything that we were doing was immediately irrelevant. Like, we'd been doing a year's worth of research. We'd been building a model. It had this specific use case. We were doing it for the government. And ChatGPT came out. It's like, well, it's better than everything we've ever made. So all of our past research is irrelevant now. And so that's the sort of situation that we're in, where since this space is advancing so quickly, the stuff that you learned 3 years ago, it just doesn't matter now. So because of that, you're right, Molly. We're all at similar spots. It's just who's using these things the most regularly. They're the people who are the most expert.
It's a little like the internet, we were all rookies at the very beginning, and here it's so widely integrated into everything we do. I imagine this unfolding a lot like that, sort of, you
Exactly,
know.
and it's about learning that process.
Mhm.
Because while the models will change, the people who've understood how to engage with a model, those are the people who will always be the fastest on the pickup. Oh, there's some new model out that can do all these new things. If I've never used generative AI before, it's going to take me a long time to figure out, like, well, how do I use it? What is this? What can this do? If I've been using these tools a bunch, when the new thing comes out, I'm immediately like, oh, that's going to solve A, B, C, D problems because current models don't. Great, neat. I can do it in all these new ways. The last question we have here, one of the questions was about, how can we structure prompts to get the best feedback? And I think I sort of covered that in the talk of, there's a few tips, but mostly just talk to it like a human and ask it to write a prompt for you. Last question that we have from the pre-submitted questions is, how does AI prevail over previous modes? And I think the real thing here is that it's generative. It has unlimited energy and it has unlimited time, and it can make as many things as you want it to make. And it can make them with very little cost and with very high accuracy. And those things put together make it a wildly powerful tool. All right, Molly, what do we have from the current questions?
All right, my friend, we do have a couple good questions actually, we have several questions. A couple of them I can wrap into the same question. Let's see. This question comes from Tammy, and she wants to know if you're familiar with any apps that work best for AI animation. She likes to use her own video footage and then transform it using AI. Is there a specific tool that you have some experience with you might recommend?
I've seen a couple. I do not work in that area, so unfortunately, off the top of my head, I could not answer that question. But I've seen a few that do animation. There are a handful that do animation off stills. So if you upload a still image and then tell it, I want the clouds to be moving left to right, it'll just auto animate that, things like that. I'm not sure that I've seen any that do animation off of video. The video models are relatively new. But yeah, I mean, there's a couple I've seen. Top of my head, don't remember the names though.
Now, so if I wanted to go find them, or Tammy wants to go find them, is it like, can we Google them? Like
Of course, of course.
best, and that might help us find something we like.
Yeah, I mean, my quick Google. Oh, Stable Diffusion can do. Yeah, okay. Is Move AI? Yeah, so Move.ai is one that I've seen before. But again, I was just I just Google it anytime I'm looking up a new tool, I'm just Googling that tool, describing it, and then saying, what's out there to accomplish this new task. But yeah, looks like my quick Google on my other screen while you asked that question shows me that there's at least a handful of ones. Some of these I've heard of, some I haven't, but it's just not an area that I've ever poked into because I don't do any animation.
So worth us sort of going shopping
Yeah,
on Google
exactly,
to
exactly.
find
And that's
what shoe
and that's the
fits.
thing. You have to try them in order to be good with them anyways. So find a couple, try them all out.
Awesome. Actually, when I was looking for the cover image for your presentation today, I was trying to figure out what image do I use that sort of encapsulates this, and so I put it into an image generator, sort of what I wanted, and after a few times, that was sort of like the vibe I was feeling, and I
Exactly. Just
thought,
it takes
okay,
it takes
yeah, it
some
was just a
testing.
little refining each time, and based on what I saw, I gave it feedback,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
I'm so glad to hear you say, be polite, use your good manners. I have always found myself, can you please, very
I mean, you
politely.
certainly don't have to. It's not going to improve the output, but I think it helps you as a user sort of approach the way you should describe your question in the right way.
Absolutely. And keeps your skills sharp for actual
Sure,
socialization.
sure.
Yeah. Okay, and let's see. Darren asks, what is the outlook for generative AI for assisting with design and engineering? For example, home design with like HVAC and electoral engineered drawings generated by AI. Do you
Yeah,
know if there's
so
anything?
again, I don't know any of the specifics of that area, but a lot of I only know some of this because I'm getting my kitchen redone. But the designer we're working with for our kitchen remodel, for instance, she came by our house. We looked at everything. We described to her what we wanted, and she came back to us with some 3D models. Um, Generative AI is the sort of thing where when we think about building out those 3D models, uh, from a generative AI standpoint, you could very quickly just give it some numbers and say, hey, the wall is this big, the wall is that big, generate the model. And it can generate it very quickly. And then you could say, move the cabinets, it'll move the cabinet. So instead of having a situation where you're having to, as the engineer, physically like, okay, let's try moving these over here, and I need to make all these adjustments. Um, you can just input text commands or voice commands and say, no, make those cabinets smaller. Make the counter marble. Make the floor wood, whatever, and it'll just auto generate those things. So the immediate application, I imagine, is being able to quickly iterate on possible designs. Eventually, you want to be very careful. I wouldn't use a generative AI model to do final designs because final designs need to be, millimeter perfect. Um, and at least with current models, I wouldn't trust that. In the future, maybe they could get better. Certainly, who knows? But right now, I think the best use case would be, hey, draw up this room 10 different times with the HVAC systems in these different places, so that the customer gets an idea of what it might look like. And instead of you having to draft 30 images, you can say, hey, which one of these looks the best? That one, cool. Okay, so I'll design the system this way. I'll put the ventilation here, and I'll have this unit here, and whatever.
That's awesome. So it's essentially like another tool in the box. You
Yep,
could do all this stuff yourself, but this might be a more efficient way, perhaps.
exactly.
And then, okay, I have one final question. And this will probably be a catch-all for sort of the other three questions I have in here. So for those of us who have only used the free version of Chat GPT, we've only just now sort of broken through the threshold. Is there a next logical step for us? Is that getting the paid version? Is that sort of moving up a notch to some other brand or company or whatever?
Sure.
AI?
Yeah. So, I mean, once you have some experience, because the first time you use the free version, you're like, wow, this is super neat. This can do so much. And then eventually you start being like, I mean, it can do some stuff.
Mhm.
The paid versus free version difference is night and day.
Yeah.
If you've been using the free version for a while, you eventually upgrade to a paid version. You're like, wow, this is wildly different. And there's a few different models. They all have their different strengths and weaknesses. Um, so, for instance, if you use Gemini, Google's model, Gemini has a giant context window, which is to say that you can upload a massive amount of data at once and have it do an analysis to the extent that you could take, and I know this because people have tried it. So, this is not like an example I came up with. This is a test people have run. You could take the text of some massive book, take a 500-page book, take the text of it, and add in some line that doesn't make sense. Add in laser beams to Hamlet, you know, and upload that and ask, is there anything here that seems out of place? It'll say, yeah, laser beams on page 374. Um, so the models that you use, sort of, they all work a little bit differently. What makes the most sense for you is sort of dependent on your use cases. If you have tons of data that you need analysis for, Gemini is a pretty good idea. If you're trying to do more multimodal stuff, OpenAI is a good idea. If you don't want to spend any money, you can use Bing Chat. If you turn Bing to creative mode, that is actually, it's the same as OpenAI's paid version, as ChatGPT's paid version. You just only get a certain number of uses per day. Um, so you could use Anthropic models, a bunch of different models, but really, yeah, it's use the paid version, because now that you've used and try it for a month, and if it's not impacting you much, that's okay. But yeah, that's the next step, is to try the paid version and see what else you can accomplish with something like that.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that hot Bing tip. I think that was
You,
some
oh,
some
it only
good
works.
intel.
It only works. I mean, if you use the app, that's fine. But otherwise, you have to use the Bing browser. You can't just go to
Okay.
bing.com. It has to be the Bing browser and then going to bing.com and then
Ooh,
doing it. Yeah. It's a
extra
bit
hot
silly.
tip.
It's a bit silly.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps up most of our questions here. We had a lot of very similar ones. I think that's about it. Russ, this has been ultra informative. Thank you so much
Abs-
for joining us. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about Meet before we go, if
sure.
people are looking to maybe expand upon what they learned today?
Yeah. If you're interested in emerging technology and or entrepreneurship, I direct the Masters of Entrepreneurship and Emerging Technology program. Feel free to check us out if you're thinking about putting together a startup or being innovative, or even if it's just that you don't want to quit your job but you want to do more cool stuff at work. That's sort of what our degree is targeted towards. And then if anyone here, if y'all are working on generative AI stuff, or if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can shoot me an email, hamerar@miamioh.edu. You can find me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect. Happy to, chat some more. Yeah, as needed. But yeah, thanks for your time, everybody.
Well, thank you again, Russ. You're super engaging, and I would recommend to any viewer who is interested, definitely have a chat with Russ. He got me all creative, and like I wanted to go innovate something. So, if you're interested, please do check out the website and/or drop Russ a line. Well, thank you again very much. We appreciate you having spent an hour with us. As a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be available on our website later today. You can see this one and all of our other webinar presentations at alumlc.org/MiamiOH. Thank you all for joining us, and love and honor to you. Have a great day.